everybody to Rhyme and Reasoning. This is our first initial show. The Rhyme and Reason is a podcast dedicated to discuss the difference, frustration, and views of different generations, where we listen and discuss and even argue about why your time period is even better.
Yep.
I'm Vic Mendez, Big Vic. I've been wanting to do a podcast for a while now, so I got to get together with a couple people, and I'm, as you're going to hear throughout this show, I'm very, very defensive and very proud of my time. I was born right around the 1976, so I mean I'm what they call Generation X, and we're going to get a little more into that as we go. But to make everything better, I always bring people along with me. And first of all, let me introduce you to my co-host, who hopefully is going to be just as interesting as he always is. Noe, the owner and head coach of Ground Zero Jiu-Jitsu. He is a millennial, as you can hear through the shows and throughout future shows. He's a very proud millennial, and he represents it very, very well, as you can see his girlfriend on his shirt. Born in 91, he worked with me for quite a bit of years. I trained him years, very proud of him, even though he cost me a bunch of money. He works full-time as a marketing and social media manager for a local business, but also very proud of his jiu-jitsu. So Noe, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I love both you guys. We've shared a lot, not only like socially, but training wise, and we've been vulnerable around each other.
Yes, sir.
It's super dope to be doing this with you guys. I'm fucking excited as fuck. So.
Oh yeah.
And our second co-host is a guy who has a really great name. I know that because I named him. My son, Victor Mendez.
Very original.
As we said in the pre-show, Victor Square. He's 23 years old.
Squared.
He is Generation Z.
Yep.
Works in a factory right now. Moonlights as a superhero condor. Going back to that, just represents his Generation Z. Loves long walks on the beach and drinking freezer cold Jägermeister.
Yep.
And of course, he's my son, and he's been friends with me. Well, was friends with me my whole life, but been a friend of Noe for going on. Noe, was it about 10 years now you've known Vic?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, probably since I was 14. I'm 23 now.
Yeah.
And as Vic is a Mexican, he is also working on his Spanish, so we might throw a little stuff at him, or me and Noe can just talk some stuff behind his back, and he won't know what's going on.
Won't have a clue.
Imagine just go Spanish all of a sudden.
So welcome you guys to the show. Thank you guys for being my partners here on this, and this is like a dream for me, so I'm very excited to get this going.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited.
The first thing I want to do before we do anything else here is I wanted to thank the producer I had to put the intro music together. I went to him and told him I wanted what exactly I wanted, and he did what he did, and I think he did an awesome job. I hope you guys liked it. Detroit Lou is a super producer out of Detroit, Michigan. I've known him since he was a kid. Hopefully we can have him on the show in the future, but I just want to thank him for his awesome music that he put together for us. What you guys think of it?
Shout out Lou.
Yeah, it was fire. Yeah, I like both samples he sent. They were really like different but on point. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I told him I kind of wanted something to hit my generation, but kind of respected, your guys' stuff in there. But but I think he did a good job.
That was a sucky one, I bet.
So to get you guys back onto this podcast, what we're doing here is that I think for all of Victor Jr.'s life, and the good part of Noe's knowing me is that I always talk about my past. I always talk about how much I love the 90s, how much the 80s were the greatest. Poor Vic, his whole life, he's had to listen. He not only had to deal with learning his generation of music, he had to learn everything I taught him from, Run DMC on up. So, but as he got older, we started noticing we started having differences. Yep. And, we started going back and forth.
Uh-huh.
So also knowing Noe, who, I remember, just an example of Mac Miller when he passed away. I mean, I thought I was on suicide watch with Noe for a while because he was just, and he came to me and told me about it. And I, embarrassing. I said, who's that? Then Victor Jr. comes and tells me about it, and I go, okay, this, I guess, somebody I should know about. Yeah. So this whole podcast came about of just stuff like that happening, where I like to think I grew up in the greatest generation in the world. The time period. Sorry, I grew up in the greatest generation. I grew up in the 1976 when hip hop was just taking off. My childhood was through the 80s. We had some of the greatest musicians of all time through that. Not only through hip hop, Run DMC, Big Daddy Kane. We had Prince, the greatest of all time in my eyes. Michael Jackson, I guess you can put in there. Not a big fan. Rick James, Madonna, and then I hit my teenage years, the 90s. And you both have sat there and listened to stories. Noe, you've been to Detroit. You've spent time with my brother Boog, and we just talk about our time. And it was the greatest time period of all. So this format came out and said, you know what? Let's discuss it. Let's argue it, and let's see who had the greatest time. Also, as a quick shout out, please go to our Insta page, Reason Rhyming on Instagram. Give us a like, and you'll see a lot of our outtakes on there, and pictures of Noe.
Lots of pictures, very not safe for work images.
That's where all the views come from.
Yeah, it's where we're solely budgeted by my OnlyFans.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that's something I've always kind of appreciated from you, Vic, is that you always remember where you come from, and I know that's putting it very vague, but that was one of the things I really like about you, and it was cool because you when I flew out there to Detroit, you were taking me to all these things. You talked to me about, you took me to eat the chili hot dogs, and you fucking, everything. You kind of told me these stories I had in my head that were Victor, right? I was kind of able to experience them. That's really cool. That's something I really don't have. I don't I don't. It's not that I don't remember where I come from. I just I remember my childhood and stuff being really fast, and I was listening to music my brothers would listen to, and I would listen to stuff everybody else they would listen to. I grew up on 90s grunge and soft rock, you know what I mean? And it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I kind of started coming into my own, just due to the technological advancement that happened so fast, right? Being a millennial, it went from fucking cassette tapes to CDs to MP3s in a span of a decade. And
for sure,
it wasn't until I was a little bit more of a teenager that I started kind of building my own repertoire of music and stuff like that. So, and that's something too, my brothers and stuff, they're from your generation. And even to this day, they're super passionate about the music they loved back then. And
can we just name my generation already the greatest though? I mean, is that yet to be determined?
Well, sir, the greatest generation got the Nazis. Don't you forget that.
Hey, those guys look sharp as fuck, man. Let's just say.
No, but no, the greatest generation, obviously, it's up for debate all the time. But I mean, you can't really count mine out because it's not. I mean, we're still out here. I'm the oldest, Gen X or Gen Zer that's around 23. I'm at the max. Me and Alec, my other brother.
He's cutting it close.
So just so everybody knows what's going on, I mean, like I said, I'm Generation X. Noe was born through that weird period of the world that happened, and they got the name millennials.
Well, you mean
and then Vic Jr. was born right at Vic, you would say right at the beginning of your Generation Z.
Yeah, because some online places say that the cutoff is 97, at 97, or sometimes the cutoff is at 2000. But I like to consider it 2000. Yeah. In that case, then my other brother Alec is a millennial, but a baby millennial, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think that counts.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
It's like a margin generation.
But I can say here that we're all very proud of our time period, and whether like Victor said, there's different websites that call them different years, and I mean there's no official time of let's say the X or the millennial. I think I've seen 3 different websites while I was doing some research that all had different years. But if you look at time period wise, I'll tell you that for me, my generation, whether it's X or the 90s, to me, was the golden time of hip hop. And many people can argue that, and I think that you all have your own version of what you guys thought was a great period in within your time period, whether it was the thousands or the tens or even the 20s now.
For
And
sure.
I would go back and argue, and I could say, there's some music that I like now. But to me, there's nothing that's going to come out and change the world that I've seen recently, like NWA did.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's going to change or make a statement the way the greatest group of all time in my eyes, Cypress Hill, did.
Or like KRS-One or
KRS-One.
Wu-Tang or any of them. I get you.
To anybody right now, like I still haven't seen anybody lyrically ever to be as great as KRS-One and his messages, or somebody to do what Prince did. I mean, if you ever look at the story of Prince and what he did, it's like, I mean, nobody can do what he did. So that's why I always come out on top and say, hey, challenge me, challenge me, because, I have that time period that I can go back and say, I go to the gym and say, you know what, give me 90s hip hop and I'm good, and I think you all can say the same thing, even though you have your time periods, but you also go back to that 90s hip hop and you also listen to it. Am I wrong?
No, not at all.
I think so. I think a lot of your guys had to walk so our guys could run. You know what I mean? Like your artists and like Cypress Hill. I'm a huge fan of Cypress Hill. I was listening to Cypress Hill when I was like fucking 11 years old, going to sleep to like Black Sunday. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, I think that's like a big millennial thing. And the more I notice it, it's like millennials really, we look back to the 80s. Like we all, like a lot of people, like a lot of the people in my era are like, I wish it was the 80s or I wish it was the 90s. Like my girl's obsessed with 90s aesthetic, obsessed with like 70s and 80s aesthetic. So like well, there's
whatever. I'm sorry. Whatever year it is now, people are gonna go backwards 30 years for like fashion inspiration and music inspiration. So 30 years from now would have been the 90s, and you can see that like the grunge aesthetic is coming back with like people my age. We all go thrifting, and whose clothes are there right now? People who were alive in the 90s, Like it's one of those things that it's like everything's cyclical. So like in the 80s, motherfuckers were wearing 50s clothing because it was cool. That's why you got the Wonder Years. It's such a big show in the 80s, and it was about a kid growing up in the 50s.
Yeah.
Awesome show. Awesome. I had the biggest crush on Winnie. We're going to have to take a quick break real quick and give some from my advertisers. But before I go, just one quick comment that Victor said is that he said 30 years ago was the 90s.
Yeah.
Nothing makes me prouder than feel so old at this moment. We'll take a quick break and come back to that right after this message.
All right, guys. So I'm Noe. I'm the head coach at Ground Zero Jiu-Jitsu. We're going to be we're working out of Ed Couch, Texas. Very, very little martial arts in that area. So we got a huge opportunity to open up there. I want to invite you guys to go check it out. We have amazing gi, no gi jiu-jitsu programs. If you don't know what that is, it's just the attire we wear when we train, right? We provide enriched exploration into the fundamental pillars and intricate mechanics of grappling, equipping you with indispensable insights into their execution and, more importantly, their safe implementation. Our curated curriculum transcends traditional boundaries to embrace the cutting-edge techniques essential for thriving in modern jiu-jitsu. We pride ourselves in fostering a dynamic environment of collaborative learning and unparalleled growth. Basically, we're the best jiu-jitsu school in the RGV. So we're working on that. We got one of the biggest mat spaces. We have the biggest square footage facility in the RGV. We have a second floor dedicated solely to mixed martial arts. Our bottom floor is split between kickboxing, boxing, and jiu-jitsu. And we also have a full curated weight training area. So we're super excited setting it up for you guys. So I hope that you guys can stop by and check it out. Go first.
Welcome back. Thank you, Noe, for that Ground Zero. Look forward to training there with you hopefully real soon. I don't know about the best school because, I like to think my school is, but, that's just me. We kind of left off there about, talking about the different time periods. And, Victor kind of said the part about the 30 years ago, which kind of threw me for a loop because sometimes I forget that it was 30 years ago that I was 14 years old, actually 34 years ago.
34. Let's
just had a birthday, guys.
Yeah.
But that time period of where the millennials came in, to me, it kind of like shocked me because I wasn't prepared for that. I had become an adult already. I started doing my working nonstop, had my kids, and I started seeing, I remember at the time, Hot Boys came out, with Lil Wayne and all them, and I was kind of like, what is this? This ain't Bone. This ain't, the hip hop I'm used to, and I started bad mouthing it right away. Where nowadays I'm kind of like, some Lil Wayne would be nice, and that's knowing that was your time period, get in here and let's see what you have to say, how your period was memorable. Well, we can go back and say where 30 years ago my period was, I feel was memorable. What about yours?
Yeah, man. I mean, millennials are definitely fucking weird. Like we're like, but like it. I think it's just something like you said, right? Like your generation was very, very hardworking, very, very much a provider mindset, right? Whether male, female, but like I spent a lot of time alone because my parents, were always working. My brothers were always out and about. So music was a thing. I still remember finding like Marshall Mathers EP like under my brother's bed and like putting it on, like hearing Eminem for the first time and like learning bad words for the first time.
So cold, did you get me so wrong?
You want to hear a funny story about the Eminem? Is that me and Victor had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and when Eminem came out, I didn't like it, and I'm from Detroit, and I'm from Detroit, and I didn't like it because the first song that came out was "My Name Is," and I thought it was corny.
And but it's definitely like a more like you said, right? It was a clash with the hip hop you were used to,
yeah.
Right. So even though I had the Bone Thugs, I had the Cypress Hill, I had all this stuff, Wu-Tang on my wall and stuff. When I heard Eminem, it was something I had never heard before, and more importantly, it was catering to this fucking voice in my head that was like, "Fuck everything up." You know what I mean? And mind you, I wasn't like a bad kid. My parents, I never was abused at home or nothing like that. But I had this aggression in me, from just being at home all the time. And
would you say that your generation has like the angst, and you can see it in like with the kind of music that you guys liked?
Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. Because like we were fed Nirvana, spoon-fed Nirvana, like that was the big thing. And so we just had this thing. When I first heard Eminem, I was like, oh, fuck yeah. I would play that album over and over and over again. Like I can recite the whole first two albums. Yeah. And then that people tried to kind of replicate that, but a lot of people fell short, because Eminem's the fucking GOAT. But
to go back to Vic's question real quick, Noe, a lot of people say what Eminem put out in that first album, which was a Slim Shady LP, which I believe came out in 98. And Victor, you can confirm that for me, but I believe it was 1998. A lot of people say what's wrong with your generation is exactly what Eminem and the artists at the time put out those first couple years, and then you guys just took it and ran with it. And like people in my generation, 99 was a year, people from my generation and beyond. And the funny thing is, going back to feeling old, is that I remember people from the baby boomers talking about how hip hop was ruining the world. And then I became one of those people when I started listening to the world, the music of your millennial time. So a lot of people say those first couple albums that were coming out during the 99, 2000 was kind of made you guys to be that period of time that gets such criticism now.
It set the pace.
Yeah, it definitely did, man. And like Vic said, like that's kind of the attitude like a lot of our millennials have, but like it isn't necessarily a bad thing, like throw that finger up type deal. A lot of my entrepreneurship, which a lot of stuff I learned from watching you run a multi-million-dollar business, right? But a lot of that like not giving a fuck, just going for stuff attitude was based on that type of attitude, like to where most people tend to be a lot less risk taking and stuff. Like I have that drive, like fuck it, like I just, if I'm ever in like a doubtful, and it's really weird, a really doubtful mindset about either a project or like taking it for example, with the new gym, I get into my Eminem funk and I start playing Eminem and I get in this real like fuck it attitude, and not necessarily not caring about responsibilities and stuff, but just the idea that, you can do so much more by doing something really different. You know what I mean? And that's what Eminem did. And a lot of the artists in this era, going into even, I'm a big metalhead, so a lot of the, even falling into like Vic's era, a lot of the metal and stuff took a lot from, like, if you hear the vocals, I know a lot of people don't understand the vocals, but a lot of the vocals in a lot of this metal music was pretty much like more angrier Eminem's just screaming with guitars. You know what I mean?
Yep.
like a lot of it for me translated really well. And
like, you could even go mainstream with it and talk about Marilyn Manson too. I mean, at the time, the most two controversial figures in the '90s were Eminem and Marilyn.
Yes, dude, absolutely, dude. I will never forget. Like, I went to borrow a PlayStation 1 game from my neighbor.
And PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
Realize your age at the moment you said that. PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
Victor called me last week that he was about to buy a 5.
Yeah. But like, dude, no, like seeing him, I remember it, and it was like, I remember that's when I realized I was like the black sheep in my house, because my brothers were there with us, and we walk in, and I'm there holding this game, and Marilyn Manson rips this fucking Bible on stage, and my brothers freak the fuck out, and I'm like, yeah,
that's sick.
Like, this is dope. Like, I remember next week I went to Mexico, Matamoros, and bought like the Marilyn Manson albums, and the Dragula, and like all these, even our video games, like they were very, compared to the type of video games that your generation kind of put out, like, they set the staple for like future gaming and stuff.
And that's where I was going to go to next, was that, we focused a little bit on music here for a little bit, but there was other things that helped shape what your generation is known for now. We can go into video games and how Mortal Kombat went from let's say a simple fighting game to a bloodshed. And how the world was shocked and they wanted to ban it. And, all these Christian groups and all these different types of groups wanted to take that game off the shelf. Now, you compare Mortal Kombat from like the early 2000s to what we see now, it's a children's story, right? Yeah. But you have to remember, like, in that time period, that was changing.
It was shocking.
The video games was a big part of what your generation was showing, that they wanted to be a little bit more, I guess, what's the word, explicit,
Explicit's good.
And the music said it, but also the video games. But what is something else throughout your period of time that you can say, you know what, this represents, in a good or bad or both, that you probably say that, you know what, my generation was a badass, or my generation really fucked this up?
I'm always gonna like defend it, right? But like sticking with this idea of just like, I think your generation had a little bit finer moral compass. Like, you still had core values that the previous generation kind of instilled in you guys. And I think because you were sword hardworking in your era, our parents didn't have the time on hand to instill those moral codes into. Like, a big thing for me was like slasher movies and stuff like that.
Yep.
Like, in the 80s, you have, the cult classics and stuff, but like, I have a Ghostface tattooed on my arm.
Yeah.
Wearing the University Red Jordans, but like, that's a big dude. I play slasher and horror movies as like background noise, I have people in new gen, and like, my brothers are like, why the fuck are you watching this horrendous movie? Like, I kind of find comfort in that chaos.
In the chaos, yeah,
man. And I think that's like a millennial, just like straight up, like we were in such a chaotic, mindset all the time, that we find comfort in these type of things, whether it was a good or bad thing. Man, I'm not really sure, because I see the downside to it, because my generation did do a lot of fucked up things, in as far as violence and things like that go. But I also think we set a lot of trends, and we're very hard to replicate those type of ideas and things that we were able to accomplish, because we were so desensitized to shit.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? Like it like, oh fuck.
That's the clock saying that your time was up, but it's okay though. We can go a little bit longer on it.
I thought somebody rang your doorbell.
Yeah,
No, it was Ghostface.
That's what I'm about to say, bro. That was
you're
Ghostface.
talking about horror movies, and then that pops up, right?
Well, if you don't mind, if I can chime in here on that part too, is that if you think about it too, as far as slasher movies go into the 80s, into the 90s, the biggest slasher movie in the 80s could have been like Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. But what was really good, really big in the 90s was Scream. Right. And it's not a supernatural story. It's about the inner evil that is within the American youth at the time.
Well,
There's a bunch of
kind of goes back to the Eminem song, like we said
Mhm.
earlier, was that scream. It kind of like it set the stage
Yeah.
for your
And
generation and what was going on. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Victor, but a lot of that it kind of follows back. And then I'll say this one last statement before I let you finish, and then because it might go to what you have to say there.
mhm,
Is that where I said is it good or bad, and you stated your comments, it can be looked at either way.
mhm,
Some may look at that generation and what is done and how they were desensitized and all these things, but some may have said we got a chance to express ourselves with
mhm.
no filters for the first time in any generation, because my generation had filters. The generation before that made a big deal about Woodstock. Generation before that made a big deal about Elvis Presley shaking his hips.
Yeah.
So it could be a good or a bad thing. I'm sorry, Victor. You can go ahead and finish your thought there.
No, essentially what I was saying was you can see that in that like 90s culture. It was very prevalent that now people were aware that for the past 30 years they have been cradling and nurturing people, suburban people who now have been watching like horror movies and slasher movies and listening to rock and roll music. And now they're in, 30 years later in the 90s, they're in the suburbs. And what happens there? There is nothing really can grow in a place like the suburbs. The only things can only die. And that's what we get from like that kind of music. We get that from Eminem, we get that from Scream, we get that from I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's all that kind of things, the inner secret that everyone had at the time. And ultimately it led into 2001 when things ultimately, no pun intended, blew up and things happen. And you see how the media changes into the 90s, into the 2000s. You get shows like The Sopranos where they have whole episodes where they talk about how insecure America felt after the terror attacks on 9/11. And I like that we got to jump onto like the whole like film aspect and TV aspect, and because the whole our generations are essentially what our pop culture is, because that's how we remember.
It's a big
I only know the 80s because of how many times I've seen Animal House.
Is there a limit to that movie? Let's be honest.
No, there's not. There's never a limit.
John Belushi is probably the. I don't think the generation gives him the credit he deserves.
Or the one with Chevy Chase and Robert Downey. That one was good too.
Chevy Chase.
He's a diver in that movie. I don't know if you remember.
I gotta go back and look at that one. We're gonna have to take another quick break, but I'll leave you guys with this thought for the break to come into the next spot. But Noe mentioned in his part here that the parents were at work a lot, so it allowed his generation to be more a little bit loose and unfiltered and able to do things. That's one thing a lot of people don't like to think about, was the generation that people complain about, which is the next one. It's our own fault. And we're not taking that in consideration. Millennials are so fucked up. Excuse me, Noe. But whose fault was it? It was ours. Victor's generation, millennials may complain about it, but whose fault is it? Let's take that into the break, and we'll come back right after this message.
Victor,
hey, I might have to do one in Spanish soon, but we'll get back into this now. Ready?
Okay.
All right, guys, welcome back. We're in the last part of today's podcast. Once again, I want to thank Noe. I want to thank Victor Jr. Once again, let's not forget the guy who made that beautiful music at the beginning, Detroit Lou. Check out his Instagram page.
Shout out Lou.
And super duper producer out of Detroit. He's doing some great things. He has his music up for sale. Give him a call. Give him a holler on Instagram. Before we went on to break, I kind of left everybody with a little thought there. And basically it was saying is that the generations that come after always can have some type of blame to put back into the generation before. It is coming based off of Noe's comment of his parents worked a lot, so he got away with more stuff. So if I can sit here and complain about millennials, was it my fault?
Mm.
Can Noe complain about Z when it's his fault?
Mm.
Victor, your thoughts?
So, have you guys ever heard the song by Billy Joel, "We Didn't Start the Fire"?
Yes.
It's
Great
like the
song.
it's the ultimate anthem, I think, for like this topic and discussion. You know, I inherited a world as a Gen Z and 23 years old. I inherited a world that I had nothing to do with until like 4 years ago. You know, I was a student. I was in high school, and as the way the world is moving, it's hard to grasp on. I feel like it's harder than it's ever been before, because back in the day, I mean, you didn't have the internet, and the internet is so powerful and so much a part of like Gen Z culture, like that. A lot of us make our money that way. There's a lot of people my age that are just drop shippers. You guys know what drop shippers are?
No, explain that one.
A drop shipper is someone who buys cheap products from like a place like AliExpress and then resells them on Amazon and labels them differently. That's like a whole other like profession. And that's something that my generation and like the tail end of Noe's generation, the millennials, that's something that they created. It's something that people who realized that they didn't want to give their lives to a 9 to 5 or, you know, go to a traditional job, that they could do. There's so many opportunities online for people these days. But, you know, with that, you always have, I like to call them bitter, the people who are like, oh, this generation sucks. They have no work ethic. Well, who's the one who raised us? Who are the ones who made us the way that we are? And in my case, the one who raised me is right here, and it's my father, Big Vic. You know, and luckily, I think I have a good head on my shoulders, and you know, so did he. Apparently, you know, that he made me. But there's other people that, you know, I'll meet in the world, especially at work, and I'll ask them like, well, what don't you like about like the new generation, or what do you like about your own generation? It's just something that I like to talk to them about, and they always end up bringing up work ethic, which I think is insane to me, because like, come on, like the millennials invented, well, to be fair, the baby boomers invented the internet. You know, people like Steve Jobs, they were the prophets of this new saculum. Are you guys familiar with the saculum like theory?
No.
Okay, so before we could measure time as centuries, we had saculums, which were 80-year periods, and in those 80-year periods, we had turnings, and those turnings are like, you know, they're quarters, 25 years, and at the turn of this, at the end of World War II, we entered our current saculum. So everyone who was born after World War II, the baby boomers in that first 25-year period, they are part of the first turning. After that, it's Gen Xers. After that, it's the millennials. And after that, it's Gen Zs. So if you were to look at it, the people who set the pace were the baby boomers. People like Steve Jobs, people like Bill Gates. They are the people who created the infrastructure that we rely on today. Somewhere along the line, I don't know how, but the Gen Xers and the millennials completely went by the wayside. There's some millennials who obviously know tech pretty well, but I work with a lot of millennials, and we work this type of job that we work, and it doesn't require a lot of technical knowledge, and it benefits them that way. They don't feel left behind. They don't feel, you know, like they're not equipped for it. And the Gen Xers, I feel, also feel the same way. I mean, how many times do you have to ask Nick for tech support at work, Dad?
Uh-huh.
You know, there's a gap there, and so the baby boomers and the Gen Zers actually, I feel, have more in common than, you know, the Gen Xers and the millennials.
Well, I can see that, but it's a different in common. So, like as you said, the baby boomers set the standard for what it was going to be for the future,
and we are the future. We're living that future.
and the Z's now are setting the standard for what is the future, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's where some of the frustration comes for like us X and probably, and Noe, I don't know about how you millennials are, but like me, who like my biggest frustration with the new generation is that, you know, like just because they and let me try to rephrase this. My biggest frustration is because they don't want to respect the way of the past. Is that good or is that bad? I don't know. You know, I was listening to a podcast that said, am I the asshole? Because sometimes that's what I think, you know, like you don't want to respect the past.
Mm.
But there's some things on this new generations that don't bother me either. Like for
Mm-hmm.
instance, internet. You know,
Yeah.
the way
Well,
internet has
do you
become.
think that's because that's something that you benefit from?
Oh yeah, and that's a big thing about my generation. If I
Uh huh.
benefit from it, I'm gonna like it.
Uh huh.
But the day that I start having frustrations over it, I'm gonna state my case and say I hate this damn thing. That's the part
Yeah.
about being old.
Uh huh.
At 48 years old now, I can sit there in my rocking chair if I want to, which I seen one at the store
Mm.
that I might buy myself, and and I can sit there and say this frustrates the hell out of me.
Yeah.
But it's not that I disrespect the other generations. I just feel mine was better.
And how do you feel about like the generations that like were above you, like the baby boomers? You would say that my grandfather was a baby boomer, my grandmother was a baby boomer. How do you think their parenting affected you?
Their parenting was,
Because I
I,
think as a Gen Xer, you were borderline a latchkey kid.
yeah, I was, but no, I was a little bit before that because we didn't believe in latchkey so much. It's like, you know what, stay in the house, don't open the door to nobody. If anybody knocks on the door, you hide underneath the bed.
Mm-hmm.
Generation. But the way my parents were raising us, to me, was, I think it's almost a generation different than what they were seeing in the 60s and 70s and
Oh.
50s, because my parents were more of a generation of, you know what, I got to go to work all day.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to remember, baby boomers, and I don't even know what the generation was called before that, but
The greatest generation, the dudes who fought in World War II.
they had the 8 to 5. You woke up every morning, and you ate breakfast with your family, and then you went out to school, and the father walked out with his suit, and he went out to work, and the mother stayed home cooking dinner and shopping all day and all
Mm-hmm.
that. Well, mom and dad couldn't do that.
Yeah.
We're from Detroit. Mom went to go make cars.
Do you also think that that was a like you are a first generation American, right? Do you
Yes.
think that the way that their work ethic was is different because they weren't? So like my Oppie had a different work ethic because he was not from the states, the continental states, of course. Puerto Rico is a territory.
I think that it's because he had no choice. Now, what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, though, I think you're going in the right direction. I think that's true. And no, you could probably say the same thing about his parents.
Uh huh.
His parents come from Mexico, and they were probably, you know what? Ain't nobody going to give us nothing. We got to make this money because these kids are hungry.
Yeah,
You
both
know?
both parents are gonna work. We
Yeah,
got to make this work.
exactly. And my parents were the same way, but my dad has a different situation because he had a different type of life. And
Mm-hmm.
if he didn't hustle, he was not going to eat. So
Yep.
even though he was a hard worker, but he also made sure he made his money and doing his things, and always made sure we had food on our plate. But mom came from Mexico, and she was the no joke. Ain't nobody gonna give me nothing. She was part of that women generation. And Noe, maybe correct me if your mother the same way or your grandmother, but I don't need a man to make money to make sure we're good, because I
Yeah.
can go make that car just as
Mm-hmm.
well as he could. And that's where what's that women, pro women.
Feminists.
Yeah, that's where that all started. And you remember the picture of the woman with the thing in her hair, because
Rosie the Riveter.
they had to go make the cars when the guys went to war.
Yep.
But mom didn't stop.
Yeah.
Mom worked at Chevy. Mom wouldn't let us drive. Mom wouldn't let us purchase an foreign car. We had to drive American. To this day, I drive American because I'm not going to tell my mom I'm driving a Honda.
If my mommy found out you were driving a Gremlin, it would have been different.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's why mom had a Monte Carlo
Yeah.
straight off the line
Yep.
that she helped build. But that generation like, you asked me what I think about that generation. I respect them.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of times when I was younger that I was thinking, what the hell? They're too strict. I don't like the way they're thinking. They're too old school. And this gets on my nerves. And this is one thing you guys are going to learn as you guys get older. You guys all thought those same things about the generation before you. But when you get to a certain age, you're always going to have that thought of, what the fuck are they listening to right now?
These damn kids.
What the fuck are they watching right now?
Yeah.
You call this a movie?
Yeah.
I watched Roadhouse yesterday, the new one, and I said, you know what? Jake Gyllenhaal, great actor. He ain't never gonna hang out with Patrick Swayze though. Like, I mean, he can't hang with him.
Yeah.
Patrick Swayze was a badass.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the whole difference of the generations.
I think that just comes with the. I had this realization, like again, I'm a big horror fan, and you see these new like horror movies coming out. They no longer cater to our generation, or at least they no longer cater to the millennial generation. Like
How
there's
so? What do you mean?
just even the way movies are shot. Like the movies are a lot faster. There's
Okay.
like, the climax is a lot less like inciting. Like I can tell, it's a lot more. Even the vocabulary. Like I'm a big vocabulary dude. Like
Mm-hmm.
teaching jujitsu, articulation, all that stuff is important. I pay attention to a lot of these things. And if you follow dialogue to, for example, Scream, right? The
Mm-hmm.
first one, you follow dialogue to any new like slasher movie or stuff like that. It's very, very different. The slang is different. They're clearly catering to a younger crowd.
Yeah.
And I think as far as our pride goes, you can either accept it or you can be like, that's fucked up and be upset about it,
That
right?
that you felt like left by the wayside.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But that's just what happens. Like you can't. So parents say,
That's a good thought. Like question. Like how old were you when you felt like, it wasn't about you anymore, and that they were catering to like the younger crowd? Like, start with dad, I guess, right?
ooh,
I
Like
would have to
when
say I would have to say that Eminem album.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because and I had this conversation with you. I didn't like Eminem until Guilty Conscience came out.
Well, it's the same album, but you mean like the next track? You
No, no,
didn't.
like Guilty Conscience, from what I remember, was not released right away. See, because I didn't like Eminem, which means I wasn't going to listen to the album. See, I'm
Okay.
part of that generation who I didn't like the song. I'm not going to go buy. I'm not going to go spend $5.99 at the time or
Yeah.
$7.99 for the whole cassette tape.
Uh huh.
You know, um,
You could just listen to it on MTV whenever it comes
yeah.
on.
Which another reason we'll get to that, and that's for future shows. How I had MTV and you guys didn't, but
We had MTV. It was just different.
yeah, you guys had
for
a.
music.
Yeah, and that's going to be another show. That's a whole show to itself, okay? MTV. But so I didn't hear Guilty Conscience until later. And
Mhm.
even when Guilty Conscience came out, you have to understand my generation, or I was kind of like, what the fuck is he saying?
Yeah.
But
No,
it's
yeah.
kind of funny. But it's kind of funny.
Yeah,
And I
that's the
kind
thing.
of like it.
That's the thing, and it's cool. It's cool to see that at the time the older crowd would have been like, "Hey, this is too much," and then now you got people who are in my generation that are like, "Okay, that was too much." Right?
Yeah.
There's that middle ground where it was acceptable and that
I mean,
people liked it. And personally, I it's art. It's performance art.
I mean,
I'm not gonna
he killed Kim what 5 times in that album?
a few times, yeah.
Yeah. See, I mean, it was all for us, but. I mean, you know what? And all this is setting up our future shows, guys. This is the kind of stuff we want to talk about on this podcast. We want to talk about how the music has changed. What was that moment, like Vic said? I mean, Noah, you didn't get to say your moment, but go ahead before we close out the show today. What was that moment? And now, Vic, can you rephrase the question one more time for Noah?
What was the moment that you felt like you were not the target audience for like what was popular in main pop culture?
Man, it started when I hit my 30.
Okay.
Yeah, they started remaking like Goosebumps. They started all these like stuff that I grew up watching Saturday morning on eating my cereal and shit.
Yeah.
And expectancies being something totally different, and then playing it and just being like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? But like it is what it is, man. Like you can't everybody.
So would you say that it's because that they had like taken something that was like what you grew up with, or was it because they were adding to it, like their own spin to it?
Yeah,
like because like there's other things that weren't like reboots and stuff that were coming out, but you were okay with that because it was natural and it was like something that you were experiencing as you're getting older. But if something were to specifically be like, okay, we're taking The Breakfast Club, well, The Breakfast Club's a little bit before your time, but like say like another 90s movie and let's reboot that because we want to grab the attention of people like you, but we want to include the people who are younger.
yeah,
That's what bothered you.
It wasn't really something that it just shocked me. I'm like, man, like I'm really looking to. It's just like we create these expectations in our head. Like, for example, like one I'm super scared of is like The Crow. Like, and I'm supporting it 100% because it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
I loved it because of the novel, not because of the first movie. Even though I love Brandon Lee and I love the first movie, so I have my hopes up, But seeing the trailer, and then they're clearly catering to a younger crowd. But there's certain shows and certain movies that 100% cater to a new crowd. You know what I mean? And I hadn't seen that, and now every time I jump on Netflix, jump on Hulu, or even Disney and stuff, you start seeing that it's very clear, and not that it offends me or not that I'm super bothered by it, but they're not catering to me anymore. Which makes me now fall into a nostalgic kind of thing, and now I'm kind of going back to my old stuff, watching old movies, stuff like that. Really trying to understand, like, oh shit,
well,
like
welcome to growing up.
I was about to say that
and
kind
just
of
so you guys know, and just so you guys know, Roadhouse is a good movie. It's just nothing compared to Patrick Swayze. Okay, I mean,
it's Jake
Gyllenhaal. Just to finish on one last thought. Just to finish on one last thought, me and Victor had a conversation before. Noe, were you part of that group of millennials that went crazy when Steve reappeared from Blue's Clues?
I wasn't. So I've always been kind of like a little bit of a like outsider type person. I didn't freak out. I thought he was dead, first of all. But I like stuff like that, dude. I really appreciate stuff like that. Like seeing like an old actor in a new movie, like seeing Beetlejuice still being played by Michael Keaton, or seeing like when he played Batman in The Flash. The sole reason I went to watch that fucking movie was to see Michael Keaton as Batman. You know what I mean? So I think millennials.
The new trailer.
It looks good.
The new trailer to Beetlejuice looks good, but I can probably say that, and I shared this with Victor, was I watched Beetlejuice with our 7-year-old now, Thiago, and he loved it, and I showed him the trailer to part 2, and he got all excited. And now, obviously, if you look at the original Beetlejuice, the graphics were ridiculously cheesy. So, well, I'm hoping that's part of the new stuff that I like, is that the graphics are going to be a lot better.
I find that, like,
Guys,
I talked to Alec about it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just real quick, I talked to Alec about it, and I think that's what Beetlejuice was liked for. Like, it wasn't that like the CGI was bad or anything. It was that it was just something that Tim Burton felt like he could do, and people appreciated that vision at the time. Of course, people feel differently about Tim Burton now, but back then he was just like a maverick in his industry. People weren't making movies like he was. Yeah, he was a genius. He fumbled a baddie, but we all do that sometimes.
I got me one.
Guys, we come to the end of our thanks for the shirt again. Guys, we come to the end of our podcast. Thank you. Our inaugural podcast here. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it, guys. In the future shows, we're going to start hitting on so many different subjects. Today, we kind of went over a whole world of things, but I think we want to hit on the music. We want to hit on the movies. We want to hit on those Saturday morning cartoons that know he would sit there and eat his cereals and drink a beer too. We want to do, we want to do a little bit of everything, and hit different subjects, and and like I said, follow our Instagram page. Let us know if you have any ideas that you want us to hit. But the proud thing about this podcast is there's nothing that we can't talk about that hasn't changed over generations.
Yep.
Noe, thank you again. Appreciate your help on all of this, and look forward to having you.
Thank you,
Victor. Appreciate you. I hope you're able to join us for every other show. I think we had some great conversations going here. And before I leave you guys, I just want to say at the end of every podcast, I always like to give a little something that I wrote myself, and it's something I wrote a couple years ago from Big Papa Vic. You can only achieve what you thrive. Anything else is just considered weakness.